China became known as the Middle Kingdom. Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. This is chapter 11. They considered China the Middle Kingdom, and they all were like surrounding China. Japan has been compared to Great Britain, and Japan is an island off the coast, and Great Britain is an island off the coast of the mainland. Both have been able, because they're islands, they've been able to develop their own way of doing things, while at the same time copying what they wanted from the rest of the continent that they're on. They all have had civil service exams to determine who is to receive their government positions.
Do you want us to know the names of the 4 Japanese islands?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Now, again, that's something, as far as I know, it will be on your test. And I say as far as, because, folks, I'll say this about the test. I wound up making up 2 separate tests because I'm teaching 2 separate classes in this last 2 semesters, because I wound up learning that the students who took the test after the other class did made so much higher than the ones who took it the first time. So I now give different tests. So I don't know which test you're getting. But whichever one you're getting, one of them has these questions. Now again, if you see Okinawa, pass that choice up. If you see the Philippines, pass that choice up. Go to another. Japan's climate is moderate, and again, I've made a little speech about that. People who live in moderate climates tend to be more industrious. Each of you can try to determine for yourself why. Most of Japan's people live on the East Coast because the harbors are there, even though China actually is to the west, but the west has smooth beaches and not good for shipping, whereas the east side has a lot of harbors. Japan's soil is very rich, owing to the fact it's composed of volcanic ash. I want to say this about soil, folk. It seems like the soil that volcanoes spew up is better to grow crops in than the soil that's on top. We went to the moon and brought back moon soil. We tried growing plants in moon soil, and the plants grew better in moon dirt than they did in, of course we had to put water in, but they grew better in moon dirt than they did with earth dirt. This is not something that's very widely talked about, and I suspect if you ever go to Mars, we'll find that plants grow better in Mars dirt than they do in earth dirt also, if we can. But volcanic ash, again, surface ground is not as good as some of the ground. Some people, I know, this is theology, folks, but I'm going to give it. Some people believe that the surface ground is cursed. Be that as it may, and therefore that's why moon ground is better than earth ground. It's way deep down, volcanic ash is better. Japan is located on tectonic plates, and this has led to them having violent earthquakes, including huge tidal waves called tsunamis. And the most recent one was only about 4 years ago, when the tidal waves, actually the ocean came in and got even inside some of the nuclear reactors. They have a creation myth that stated that the world was created by the marriage of a god with a goddess. A lot of primitive societies have believed that. Japan is the only advanced society to believe so. This myth has survived until modern times. Now, the Japanese emperor. Japan is the only country on earth where the same dynasty is ruled for at least 2,600 years. Why? Nobody in Japan is going to overthrow the emperor, because the emperor is looked on being divine, and unless you're descended from the emperor, you can't become emperor. In fact, one of the reasons Japan was so slow about surrendering, they wanted us to promise that we'd leave the emperor alone. We wouldn't. After we dropped 2 bombs on it, surrendered unconditionally, then we left the emperor alone. But we just want to make sure they understood, no, we mean unconditional surrender. That means we can come in and occupy your territory. Well, we did. We left their room alone. We left a lot of culture. We actually helped rebuild them. But we occupied their territory. But anyway, the emperor, most of the Japanese emperors have been mere figureheads. While Japanese government has gone from being centralized to localized. They go like a pendulum back and forth. This generation, they like centralized government. Then when a centralized government, we don't like that. So they go back to local government. They just swing back and forth. And they've done this for millennia. They still have their emperor, and he's, even though most Japanese no longer say he's divine, the emperor after World War II had to get in front of him on radio, Japanese radio, and say, I am not divine. The Japanese still count time, though, based on the rule of their emperor, like ancient peoples did long ago. So the present emperor has been emperor since, I believe, 1989. That means in about the 24th year. This is year 24 for the Japanese. The emperor before him ruled for about 50 years. It's in the third year of emperor such and such. You're in the second year of emperor thus and so. Japan's land, a lot of it can't be farmed owing to the fact that it's very, very mountainous, and the mountains are steep. And a lot of times the mountains be close together, which means in a deep valley in between, the sun doesn't shine enough for farming. They did get rice in around 400 BCE, 400 CE. Now, the word Japan comes from the Jomon, and a lot of people believe that the Japanese are descended from the Jomon, we know that they're descended from the Yayoi, who may have been descended from the Jomon. The chieftains claim to be descended from the gods. DNA tests. Now, we have gotten some of the Japanese royalty to call the DNA test. Seems to indicate that the Japanese emperors might actually have come from Korea. But whatever, they appear to have been from a different race than Japanese, and a lot of times people will follow a person from outside more than they will their own people who grew up with them. No, you're too much like us. Some outsider is better than you. This is a failing that human beings have. We have in our Constitution that our president must be a naturalized, born American citizen. And yeah, it's still there. Eventually, they got to where all farmland was owned by the state. Taxes were paid directly to the state. Again, folks, this is socialism in its purest form. It did not last. Buddhism was introduced, but the Japanese did not like Buddhism. Now, eventually, though, what they did, they formed a new religion that combined some of the best elements of the old religion, the religion known as Shintoism. My niece was doing a report, which is called Shintoism. She asked me about it. I said, among the people of the world, the least religious people in the world are the Japanese. I mean, they have less loyalty to religion than anyone else. And Shintoism is known for, among other things, believing the emperor is divine, but also believing that you should beautify the area around you. But otherwise, they don't have a whole lot that they believe. As I mentioned earlier, at times the state decentralized, then the result would be more centralization. As they struggled to find their way, they go back and forth between centralization and decentralization. And again, I insert my own notes in italics. As the Greeks did, the Greeks would go from monarchy to aristocracy, from aristocracy to oligarchy, or from there to tyranny, and from there to democracy, and from democracy back to royalty again. The Romans did the same thing. They had 7 kings, one after another. They got rid of their kings and developed a democracy. Julius Caesar restored democracy and set up what amounted to an emperor again. And I'm going to tell you the United States is immune. We keep heading the way we're heading, and eventually we're going to demand that somebody who's strong and powerful come in and straighten out the mess. The Mongolians tried to conquer Japan. They failed. Kublai Khan, the richest of the Mongol rulers, the same one Marco Polo has, sent a fleet from China. A massive typhoon came up called a divine wind. There's another name for this divine wind. It's called a kamikaze. Where do we see that name kamikaze again? Most of the classes, somebody knows. We run into it again later in history. Who knows? World War II, where the Japanese suicide pilots called themselves kamikaze, and they would try to ram American ships. We now know that those planes were hard to steer, but none of the pilots ever returned to tell them that. But they load these planes down, but the pilots would become highly doped up, highly drunk. Then they load these planes with explosives and send these planes out. And when the Americans saw them, what is going on? These planes just keep coming and no amount of gunfire could keep them away. And they wouldn't drop bombs. So then they go, hey, these planes turned around. And most of the planes fell almost in the ocean. But sometimes they hit and they go up, hey, these are suicide men. Just trying to, now I want to say that suicide bombers is generally what people do when they're totally desperate and can't win any other way. They'll resort to that. And in some ways it's somewhat cowardly, but people who have a chance to win, or people on top generally don't resort to suicide missions. But the Japanese did it late in World War II. Yeah, it's in the notes. China did influence Japan even though they could not conquer them. Buddhism, again, spread into China now. Something that has been the scourge of mankind, and folk you might not realize, smallpox. Smallpox occasionally makes news. There's hardly been a confirmed case of smallpox in the world during my lifetime. We did have a case in New York back 50 years ago when I was a kid. Smallpox used to just carry off droves of people. They killed maybe a high percent of American Indians. Anyway, smallpox found its way into Japan, and again carried off a high percent of the population. Measles also. Measles, we think of it as being an almost harmless childhood disease. It puts a few bumps, red spots on you temporarily, and then it goes away, and you're immune the rest of your life. All of my children had the measles. Chicken pox, yes, they had chicken pox, measles, mumps, swells up your jaw. Some of you might know what I'm talking about, even though today I think you have shots that make you immune to a lot of that, but some of you might know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the smallpox, now, some people believe that smallpox may come back because thanks to the fact it doesn't exist anymore, doctors have quit vaccinating against it. And if the right terrorist organization found some smallpox and turned it loose in the general population, it could wipe out a high percentage. Smallpox, anthrax could make a big comeback on the globe due to deliberate means. Essentially, Japan spent a lot of its time fighting among themselves, civil wars. Then they tried to keep other people out, and this was the same thing that they were doing until the 1850s when one of our presidents sent a fleet over to Japan. The president's name was Millard Fillmore, who did nothing else we remember before. The samurai. You run into that word again from time to time. They were like the medieval European knights, and they rode horses like European knights. But the European knights were equipped with swords and spears, mostly spears, a samurai with bows and arrows. Now, folks, it took years and years of skill to learn how to shoot an arrow accurately while galloping on a horseback. It can be done, but it took them years. Now, when I was a kid, I read about cowboys who could lasso a cow. I decided I'd try to lasso a fence post. And try as I might, I couldn't get anywhere with a rope lasso a fence post. But anyway, these people, the cowboys learned how to rope from a moving horse, learn how to rope a moving calf or a moving cow. These people learned how to shoot arrows on the backs of horses at full gallop. And it took some doing. The Japanese developed a code of ethics for their samurai, just like Europeans developed a code called chivalry. The Japanese developed a code called the Bushido. Eventually, in the 1470s, the Japanese had a disastrous civil war. Now, you might wonder, where was the emperor in all this, sitting in a palace pretending to be God? Out of contact with all of this. So that's one reason the Japanese have never overthrown their emperor. He's just not that involved in politics. In fact, the present emperor felt like it was beneath his dignity to appear on television, didn't even appear on TV until finally Japan was hit by an earthquake about 4 years ago. And then the emperor, for the first time in history, appeared on Japanese television and made a speech to try to settle the people down. And they said, we are determined we're going to rebuild. But the emperor had little to do with any of this, while the Japanese took their authority back and forth. Again, a struggle between local authority and central government. Local authority and central government continues to modern times. The one I know is at least on one of the tests that you might get next week is the word ETA. The ETA are like the Indian untouchables. They were the people who did the dirty work, not allowed to take the civil service exams, not allowed to be educated. Eventually, the Japanese did allow their peasants to take the civil service exam. The problem was there were no public schools, so in order for a Japanese poor person to be educated, he had to have parents who were educated, maybe have an uncle, somebody who liked him, had to be educated, and had to decide, hey, I'm going to teach you. And if you were quite smart, even if you were poor, you could work your way up a little bit in the Japanese society. Women's status varied. This is true even in modern times. In some cases, they enjoyed equality. In other places, they were discriminated against. Now, I must say this about the Japanese women in modern times. They have the tendency to not want to get married. And yes, some of you probably have heard this. The Japanese are fast dying out. And unless they change their ways really fast, the islands of Japan are going to become devoid of human population. It's been said that Japanese women have no interest in marriage, in sex, in having babies, or in men, or in any of that stuff. And then, of course, when I said that, I had a Japanese book together. But all the men are interested in is pornography. I said, well, dying is still dying, and death is still death. Whether even if you have the best of excuses, the best of reasons, you're still all going to die and to change your ways. Right afterwards, I'm not sure I have said that or not. But nevertheless, some of you might have heard from outside sources. Again, the Japanese women complain that it's the fault of the men, and the men complain that the women don't like them. And the result is the Japanese, a couple years ago, announced that they are selling more diapers for older people than they are selling now for babies, as their population gets old and dies off and not being replaced. Have any of you heard of this outside? Yeah, a few heads are nodding. At least a few of you apparently have heard of this from outside. Okay. Again, folk, it sounds fetched, but I guarantee you I have heard it, and I don't believe I'm making it up. I talk about it to other people who've heard the same things. Again, their religion emphasizes bodily cleanliness, natural beauty. If a lot of the Japanese emphasize flower gardens, the divinity of the emperor, the state looked on as being holy. The state can never make a mistake or can never be immoral. I'll say this to some extent. I grew up with some of this myself. All right, there was a time when it was considered really, really bad to argue with an umpire, because this just showed the umpire was, number one, he wasn't going to change his call anyway, and he was always right. But today's umpires will sometimes admit that they made a bad call. At one time, an umpire never would. And my dad was like this too, just simply incapable of admitting that he was wrong or capable of being wrong. And yes, this created a lot of problems for me growing up. I have never failed to apologize to my children when I felt the need to, and I've never, hopefully never failed to admit to a class that I am wrong sometimes and I can be wrong. But the state felt like it could not be wrong, and Mussolini had the same thing in the 20th century. So this is not something that belongs way in the past. Shintoism does perform rituals. That the rituals are usually performed in front of a shrine or a holy place. Natural beauty, the tea ceremony, all this is all part of Japanese culture. Now, Japanese linked verse known as haiku. I'll always remember that word, folks, because when I was in high school, haiku high school, I was assigned the assignment to write a haiku poem. I couldn't do it. It's not my nature. But hey, I don't talk about literature much, because the word haiku, I am going to ask you to remember. Most of it I've heard anyway. It's linked verse, and the verse is something like, what, 2?
It's 575.
575 or something.
5,
Oh, no,
7,
it's
7, 5.
575, I think.
I think it's 3 lines.
Yeah,
And to
it
me,
is
the
five.
impression I get is the first 2 lines will
175.
like lean you one way, and then the 3rd line just abruptly jerks you the other way. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, 7, 5, 7,
It's 5.
Yeah.
5, 7, 5. Yeah, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and then 5 syllables again. Anyway, I gotta say, I couldn't do it, but some of my classmates come from pretty good haiku poems.
Yeah,
No.
575.
All right, Korea. Korea has been more influenced by China than the other nation has. We don't know, folk, where the Korean people came from. Now, DNA tests show them to be, yes, like the rest of us, human beings, definitely. They have claimed that they came from another planet. Be that as it may, I mean, not that I believe it in any way, but they are not related to. It's almost like they're in a class by themselves when it comes to, except that they're human. I mean, they were descended from Adam and Eve like the rest of us. But other than that, they're in a separate branch, it seems like. Some think that the first ones came from China. Now, Korea is a country that's difficult to farm, but I have to say this. When North and South Korea was divided after the end of the Korean War, the North got the best farmland, the South got the crummiest farmland. All right, did you hear me clearly? The North got the best farmland. Today, the North is starving, and the South is prospering. The Southern people, well, they couldn't farm, they turned into industry. And the Northern people are starving, and guess what? They blame it on the United States. That's a surefire way to guarantee your problems in life will never be solved. Blame it on somebody else. It's not your fault. No, the fault is communism. That's why they're starving. So basically the fault is theirs. It's not ours. Anyway, Japan has they call themselves a hermit kingdom because they've had trouble between Japan fighting over them and China fighting over them. Japan and China fighting each other over them. And this has gone on even as late as the 20th century, as late as when I was, China invaded Korea when I was 1 year old. So it's been going on. And by the way, about the Korean War, they never ended it. There was never peace treaties. The war is still going on. They just called a truce. And every once in a while, North Korea would shoot at South Korea. You'll hear about every 2 or 3 years. They kill a few South Koreans. The South Koreans will respond angrily, but never go to war over it. And this has been going on for 50 or so years. Korea has spent most of its time divided, just like it is today. It's mostly divided, mostly heavily influenced by China. Buddhism and Confucianism were introduced. Buddhism won out mostly in Korea. Buddhism became the state religion. Now, I want to jump again into the 20th century. Buddhism is, South Korea is the most Christian country on the face of the earth. But its population is half Christian, half Buddhist. But its attendance, a higher percentage of South Koreans attend church on any Sunday than they attend church anywhere else in the globe. And anyway, at times when Korea was strong and China was weak, the Koreans could drive the Chinese out. And the Koreans tried to solve the problem of the rich getting all the land, and they tried to redistribute it. But here's another example where it didn't work. The Silla government collapsed again by, you might say they collapsed. Now, I hate to say it, folks, but they collapsed by trying to help the poor. Helping the poor has sometimes proven to be the. All right, one of my students did a paper during the last of 2012 on the topic. And if this sounds like theology, I'm sorry, but the topic of the paper was who would Jesus vote for? And he was convinced that Jesus would vote Democrat because the Democrats were more interested in helping the poor. And I put on this paper, is helping the poor something that we are all to do as individuals, something we're expecting the government to do for us? We're getting no response, and maybe they're expecting it. To me, helping the poor is something that I'm to do as an individual, and not expect Uncle Sam to do it for me. All right, I'll leave that. But I don't know how much I can't tell how much you agree. But again, this is another example of a failed attempt at distribution of wealth that brought down the government. Something else we do to keep our lands from all going into the hands of one individual. If you buy a piece of property, you'd better go to the courthouse right away and claim that you're living on it and get a homestead exemption. If you don't have a homestead exemption on a property you own, the government's going to tax you out of business. All right, some of you know what I'm talking about, but you know, my wife and I, we bought a piece of property, and of course I bought 2 pieces of property before I was married. And in every case I was careful to go to the courthouse and get a homestead, because if you don't, the property taxes will go more than you can pay. And the farmers, if the government finds out that you own a piece of farmland that you're not farming, they're going to tax you out of existence. My brother, one boy can tell you something. He was farming his land, but he bought farmland, and he put 5 ponds, a big fence, and a steel barn with a concrete floor. The government came out and took note, steel barn, 5 ponds, workable fence, a bunch of cattle, and they increased his property taxes 5-fold in a year's time, because he had a more expensive farm than he had before he made all those improvements. But anyway, the whole idea is you don't allow the rich to take over all the land in the first place. Eventually, the Chinese, the Koreans, they would have governments come in and governments go. At times, the Mongolians would somewhat take over. Actually, the Mongolians, Korea was conquered. Unlike Japan, Korea was conquered by the Mongolians for a while. Finally, though, the Koreans were able to rise up, overthrow the Chinese, and eventually the Koreans were in charge of their own destiny. Vietnam, it comes to the word Viet. They began farming in the Red River Valley, eventually formed a state. The Chinese came in and conquered them at times. The Viets resisted valiantly. The Viets were able, now folks, this is something Vietnam has done at least 3 times in history. They were able to kick out the outsiders. The first time was when they were able, after a 1,000-year struggle, to defeat the Chinese, and they used guerrilla warfare. And if any of you know anything about Vietnam, and you know, as I know a lot, it's got a lot of jungles, and it's just conducive to guerrilla warfare. It's a dirty way of fighting, but it's something that's very, where you hit an enemy and then disappear. You hit him and disappear. They did it to the French in the 1950s, so then the United States thought we'll whip them, and they whipped the United States, the only country that can actually brag that they have done so. Traditionally, the Viets had been believed in nature spin, they were animistic. The Chinese tried to change from this primitive animistic religion to the more civilized Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. They didn't adopt any one of these you want, but just don't remain animistic, because, animism involves a whole lot of voodoo and a whole lot of drum beats to conjure up spirits and talking to the dead, and a whole lot of things that is known to be mind-bending. Again, I say this to you, I don't know religious beliefs of any one of you, but the Chinese felt like these beliefs were somewhat primitive. Also, the Viets would, if they decided, couples that we like each other, they just start living together without the benefit of a ceremony. The Chinese said, no, you ought to have a ceremony before you start living together. It just gives your relationship more dignity and gives the wife more rights to the benefits of, particularly after you pass on. You need to marry with the benefit of a ceremony. And folk, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I know what kind of society we're living in, but to me, your relationship will get more respect if you go through a wedding ceremony than it will if you don't. At this point, I'm going to be quiet. The Chinese, has that again?
It makes sense, because it means that you planned and you invited your family and your friends, as opposed to just running to the courthouse and getting.
Well, they didn't even do that. The Viets, we like each other. She just moved into his thatched house that his parents helped put together. There was not even a trip to the courthouse, and then she could also just move out as easily as she moved in, because there was no legal strings attached to it. Now, again, some of you may think, hey, this is great and wonderful, but eventually the Chinese came in and said, no, you can no longer start living together without the benefit of a ceremony. The Viets, so after 1,000 years, eventually overcame Chinese rule. The South and North fought each other. The Champa eventually won, but the South. Now this was changed in modern time, but the South and North fought for hundreds of years, with eventually the South winning. Actually, your book says eventually, in the long run, the Viets were the North were victorious. The Champa were the Southerners. They used guerrilla warfare. The Chinese came in for a while, but they were driven out. The Mongolians, initially, the Mongolians had the same problems that the Islamic people had. The Mongolians were great at fighting from horseback, swooping down on their enemy and, in a formation. By the way, one of the things that made Genghis Khan so effective was he ordered his men to always stay in your squad of 10 and make sure if anyone who left a squad of 10 was executed, and any enemy would always be fighting the whole squad, not just individual. And you were expected to stay in a formation and fight them, even from horseback, and folks, that's difficult to do. Well, this type of fighting, as effective as it was in the open field, did not work in the jungles. So the Vietnamese were able to use their jungles to their advantage. Yes, Vietnam had a civil service exam, and I have to quit. Okay,